This is Pod Populi.
Podcast for the people.
The Great Love Debate. It's the Great Love Debate.
The Great Love Debate. It's the Great Love Debate.
Hi again, everyone. It's Brian Howie. Welcome to the Great Love Debate, the world's number one dating and relationship podcast. Since 2015, I am back here in the very fine studios of Pod Populi, podcast for the people. I'm at the one in Boca Raton, Florida. Beware of falling iguanas out of the trees. So as I record this in early 2024, you heard me at the top say world's number one dating relationship since 2015. We started the live tour to the date almost as I record this, January 14th, 2014 in Santa Barbara, California. So 10 years ago. So when we started it then, we're not quite halfway through the last decade, and now we're approaching halfway through this decade. So it's been a minute. 450-ish shows of this podcast, and pretty much almost exactly the same amount of live shows in cities all over the world, you know? So we've had tens of thousands of people come to our shows. We've had millions of downloads, and so here we are 10 years into it. You know, in 10 years, you know, that's a big number. We're doing a little bit of publicity around that, the anniversary of it. I don't know why we like round numbers in our society. You know, every day really should be equal, which is what I always tell a girlfriend on Valentine's Day. It doesn't go very well. But we like these numbers as a way of marking time and reflecting on that time. It's something that we do. Big birthdays, special anniversaries, remembrances of this, that, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, 5 years, whatever it is, all of it. We do that. So we have a decade of doing this. Great love debate. And so much has changed during that time. I've changed, some for the better, some not. You guys have hopefully changed. Society and the dating landscape has certainly changed. And we've spoken a few times on this podcast, and I talk about it a lot when I guest on other shows about the 5 biggest things that we've come across and that have been sort of seismic shifts in the dating landscape. And I wanted to sort of arc a dating decade, what I've learned, what the answer to our overriding question is, which I will get to shortly, and why I think we have at least another decade of doing this ahead. So to review, what are the 5 things that have changed the most in the last 10 years, or at least the things that were so significant that I think they've affected us societally? Our behavior, our verbiage, our approach, and you know, you add all those things up, it affects the outcome. So just to run through them again, because I get asked this all the time, what have you learned? What has changed? First of all, obviously, the technology in our dating has changed. When we started the Great Love Debate, there was still a little bit of Match, there was still a little bit of eHarmony, still a little bit of Plenty of Fish. If you're on Plenty of Fish, get off there. You might as well be on Craigslist. Tinder, Bumble. We're a couple years into it then. So online dating apps, GPSs, even Uber has affected dating. Can't pick them up at their house anymore, fellas. Maybe send a car. But huge changes. And so the technology that was kind of coming in on the onset of it, obviously over the last 10 years, has become to be really a dominant presence in the landscape. In the middle of our 10 years, Me Too happened. And that changed where we date. Can't just hit on that guy at accounting anymore. Can't compliment somebody who comes by on a sales call. It's just no and no. Politics has ramped up and changed the way we date. People want to know where you stand on an issue, A, B, and C, before you've even decided on an appetizer. Didn't used to be that way. You used to be able to be married to somebody for 6 years before you even knew who they voted for or where they stood. It just wasn't so front burner. Now it's on dating profiles. COVID obviously changed a ton too. It got a lot of people so into their isolated funk that it actually shrunk the dating pool. A big percentage of people, you know, are still sitting at home in 2024, still there, masked on their couch, with their Netflix and their Labradoodle, and I don't think they're coming back. So the dating pool changed. And finally, and I always think this is the most significant change over the last 20 years, but mostly in the last 10 when we've been doing this show, is the rise of the independent woman. The shifting of traditional gender roles. And they've shifted more significantly in the last decade than probably any decades since the 60s. And it's really thrown the dating world off kilter. And I'm not saying off kilter is necessarily a worse kilter. I'm just saying it's off its original kilter. And a lot of that has happened during the decade of the Great Love Debate. And we've dealt with all of this over this 10-year period of doing this. And I tried to look back on some social media and some video footage of our first couple of tour stops back in 2014. Our first 5 shows were in Santa Barbara, Long Beach, California, Boston, somewhere on Long Island, and New York City. Those were our first 5. We dove into the deep end of the coastal waters. And a big point of contention back then, seems so quaint now, probably still is, were things like, oh, all the men lie about their age, and she had sex with too many people before me, or he didn't call me back. And, it seems kind of quaint, the things we were dealing with at our shows. We were barely scratching the surface on topics like bad profile pics. Or I remember people saying Tinder is just a hookup site. Like that was kind of the thought back then because it wasn't really permeated deeply into everybody who dates. And back then we were guilty. I'm not sure we were guilty because I think we were right at the time. We were adamant about how online dating isn't as good. Our tagline was, and sometimes still is, get your head out of your apps. And that sort of evolved to the best dating site is Earth. And we still believe that, but not nearly to the degree we did in 2014. Because now, honestly, I think it's perfectly reasonable to diversify your dating portfolio and have an active online presence. Because it is the norm now. And so many people only want to connect that way. And apps and Tinder and Bumble and Hinge and all them, they're not just some new trick that the guys are using to try and get laid. They're not. And so as this show has evolved, our audience has changed. We used to be overwhelmingly single people. That's who listened to the show. That's who came to our shows. But over time, both our live show audience and the listenerships of this podcast, it's become a lot more balanced. Lots of divorced people who are single, but also people in relationships and married people. They probably make up a third of our audience. But our early question, the one that kicked off this show and started everything, it's probably still on our website. It's probably still everywhere you can look for us. Why is everyone still single? We asked that in kind of a provocative manner, and people weren't like, well, everyone isn't still single, but we threw it out there. Why is everyone still single? Big, bold caps. And I got asked in an interview recently, what's the answer? And 10 years in, I didn't think I could dodge it the way I used to. I can no longer kind of avoid the answer and be cute about it by saying like, oh, my job isn't to give the answers, it's simply to raise the questions. If you do this for a decade like I have, you better have an answer at this point, or at least a pretty firm hypothesis. Well, drum roll, I do have the answer. And to be honest, I've been keeping around in my back pocket the whole time. I had the answer probably by the time we hit Indianapolis on the first few months of the tour, which was probably maybe 8 shows in. And they hated me in Indianapolis, but I had the answer. So you're like, why not just say the answer and go from there? Well, things have changed. I think it's time. And I think I will, finally, big tease to a big reveal. I'll lay it all out for you after the break. We will be back right after this. And we are back. And without further ado, and you may think this answer is too simple, but I will break it all down and give you sort of the nuance and the layers to it as we go. Why is everyone still single? The answer is fear. It's as simple as that. But fear is a very complicated concept. So it's a simple, 4-letter, one-word answer. I throw it out there, but it's very, very riddled with interpretation. But it permeates every aspect of dating and absolutely relationships. So you've heard us say a million times on this show, we always say that the answers to everything lie outside of our comfort zones. They do. Well, if you wonder, well, then why don't we get outside of our comfort zones? And when we do that, what is our innate reaction? It's fear. It's fear when we're outside of them. It's fear before we get outside of them. When things aren't going so well, what happens? We have fear of being rejected. Even when things are going well, what happens? We have fear of being hurt. We have fear of being alone. We have a fear of being in the wrong relationship. We have a fear of being no relationship. We have fear of the unknown of moving too fast or moving too slow. We have fear of moving at all. Lots of people email us, I don't want to move. We have a fear of moving towards something, away from something, with something or someone. We have a fear of judgment, our own judgment and people's judgment of us. Fear of what your friends will think. Fear of what your family thinks. In a social media universe, which is mostly strangers and is probably the most unfounded, we have a fear of what people you don't know think, which is really weird. I mean, who gives a fuck? But we do. We all do. Fear prevents us from taking a chance. Fear stops us from saying yes. Fear inhibits our ability to see and act on possibilities. And we have gone on ad infinitum around here over the last 10 years about all the possibilities. But we carefully dodge what the inhibitor is to that, and the inhibitor is fear. Fear puts up barriers. Fear clouds judgment. And I think fear blocks hope. I can't believe in the positive because all I feel is the specter of the negative. That's fear. I've quoted her before, the very wise longtime producer of this show, the 2-time Emmy Award-winning Keiko. She put it very succinctly and very accurately that there is magic in maybe. And I love that. I use that phrase all the time. I love it. But maybe is a concept that is unsure, and it's so unsure to most people that fear makes us not see the magic and not willing to take a chance on the outcome because you can't trust the outcome will be rewarding. That's fear. But you can't be rewarded without the outcome for the trust to pay off because you can't get past it. Can't get past all of it. So you get into these patterns of overthinking and second guessing and self-sabotage. What if he isn't as great as he sounded on the phone? What if she doesn't look like her photos? And the one I hate the most, what if it's awkward? How can I leave the date early? Fear, fear, and fear. And we didn't used to date that way. The pessimism has trumped the optimism for almost all of us in every situation. But a lot of times not for me. Because the things I've learned in doing this is that lots of people feel and have felt the way I do. My own messed up emotional unavailability that dominated the first, 20 or 30 years of my dating life, that was all rooted in fear. And so when I went around the country and around the world and I'd hear all the stories and anecdotes of family issues and childhood trauma from so many people, so many times in so many places, there gave me a comfort in that. This sort of camaraderie of the struggle collectively. So if I was afraid of being the weirdo who was the only one who felt that way, not anymore. And that's a big positive that comes out of our live shows. People come in there and they think they're the only ones who feel a certain way. They leave there knowing that everybody's kind of in the same boat. There's comfort in that, and comfort takes away the fear. And so a lot of the fear is gone. For me, the fear of judgment and the fear of being vulnerable, I'm not sure I have that anymore. That's because of this show. Because I've seen how people react when you open up and share and reveal. And that's pretty much what we've been doing for these 10 years. And eventually you learn how to let go of the wall and tread water a little bit and maybe start to swim to the other end. And I can, mix all the metaphors I want around here. It's my show. But everything seems to me like swimming. There's shallow ends and there's deep ends and there's rough waters and there's calm waters and all of it. And that's another thing. I bring up my show. That has definitely changed. In a way, it wasn't always my show. I did not even host the first one. I was on the stage, part of the lineup. I didn't host it. The very smart, best-selling author Jo Piazza, she hosted the very first show. And my name wasn't on it. It was just the Great Love Debate. It wasn't the Great Love Debate with Brian Howie. Because there was a time, and probably a hope out of me, that lots of people would host the show, and which would take the pressure off me, both logistically and, emotionally. Or a lot of people could host it. And we tried that a few times. We thought there were different people who could, raise the questions and find the answers and lead the conversation. And I had this vision of people doing it in all sorts of venues and mediums and exotic locales all over the world every single night. Harder to find than you think. And so the powers that be behind the scenes of this show said to me, this is yours, and you can't be afraid to own this. Not the brand and not the conversation. This collective quest. Somebody had to be in the front of the line in this journey. And, I suppose if I still like doing this 10 years into it, and I definitely do, and I've not run out of ways to steer this dialogue, I certainly have not, then I have to let my own fear, and back then I was like, wait, you want my name on the marquee? I'd let my own fear take a back seat to the hope and the possibilities and certainly the laughs. I went from never being on a stage in my life to headlining theaters and comedy clubs and music venues. A lot of people think that's not scary, especially when you're talking about this stuff. I had to let it go, and I had to not be afraid of the outcome. I didn't come up in show business as the talent, quote unquote. I spent, 20 years as a writer and a director and a producer. And if you're like, well, why weren't you the talent? Because of that one word, fear. It was out front of all of it. Because if I was out front, people would know that this is what I was saying and thinking and feeling. And so those professional / personal walls, they had to come down too for this to work. And for the most part, they have. And I've had more than a few people say to me, you know what, I prefer the podcast version of you to the real life version. I suppose there's a compliment in there somewhere. But what they mean is that it's a little more authentic now with a microphone in my hand or in front of my face than if it's just me exposed talking. So hopefully that comes through when you guys listen. I'm giving you what I got. And the fear and the forthrightness, put that in a little bowl and you get all of it. So, it's easy to tie a bow on the 10-year mark. It's a nice, neat, quantifiable block of time. And you ask, or you might think, well, how much longer is this going to go? And my answer is a little less defined, except that I can honestly say a really long time. This is going to go on for a really long time. So keep following. Because I don't think we're nearly done, as the society changes and we change and men and women change. I think we're only a fraction of the way through raising the questions, and we don't nearly have all of the answers. And I think the best way to overcome the fear is by recognizing it. And that's what I'm doing today. I'm putting that out there like, this is it, people. And I think a lot of you probably could have guessed that, but just saying it and owning it and been like, okay, we're all afraid here. What can we do with this information? Here we are. Naked and afraid. And most of those things I think are good things. Naked's good and afraid is good too, because fear can be a motivator, and fear can lead to change, and fear can shake things up. And hopefully that's what we've done. And on we go. So to celebrate our 10th anniversary, we are kicking off the 11th year, so 10 years of in reverse and 11 years going forward. The big 10th anniversary show is in right where I am right now, Boca Raton, Florida, at the Boca Black Box Center for the Arts, February 6, 2024. If you're listening to this way down the road, you missed it, maybe come to the 11th year or the 20th year, who knows. Tickets are on sale for that, bocablackbox.com or greatlovedebate.com. Please shoot us an email, greatlovedebate@gmail.com. What have you learned? What have I missed? What have you changed? You know, a lot of you have listened to this from the beginning, and I certainly appreciate that, and I respect that tremendously. And I'm sure that you've seen things that we've talked about that we don't talk about anymore, or things that we talk about a lot that have been sort of consistent through lines through the 10 years. Shoot me an email. Let me have that. And even 10 years into this, your reviews mean a lot in the podcasting ecosystem. So please like, share, follow, and review this podcast. We always appreciate them, even if you just click 5 stars. Because as always, 10 years and on, at the Great Love Debate, we never stop making love. See you next time.